Well, it's Monday, September 10th, 2018. I'm in downtown Philadelphia, near the Historic District, and I'm heading to the Eastern State Penitentiary, a famous old prison now run as a museum. Just getting onto I-676 West to get me over closer to the river. Yesterday I spent in the Historic District pretty much all day, and it was raining heavily. And today it's not raining so much, but the effects of the nearby hurricane are still leaving things clouded in and drizzling at least. Well, I found a paid parking lot right at the southwest corner of the penitentiary, and I have to wait about 15 minutes before they open up. The Eastern State Penitentiary is located just a few blocks east of the Schuylkill River and just a bit north of downtown Philadelphia. Kind of across the river from the 30th Street train station, but a little bit north of there. The audio tour and is a self-guided tour. I guess occasionally they have proper guided tours, but it's primarily a self-guided tour with an audio player that's keyed to the various locations. It's narrated by actor Steve Buscemi. Good choice. And there's also commentary from one of the former guards, one of the former inmates, and a sociologist. The prison was built at a time when the surrounding city was fairly far removed. It was sort of like an isolated rise in the land, almost a hilltop compared to the surrounding community, but it was a lot of open space around it. And it was intended to be a progressive institution to instill a sense of penitence for the inmates' wrongdoings and to get them back on track to becoming productive members of society. So that, in a sense, it was progressive, especially for the time. But at the same time, architecturally, it was designed to instill fear into potential wrongdoers who were aware of, its looming monstrous visage on the hilltop. If you do wrong, that's where you're going, that horrible place. So you can see from the inside of the walls that, it has no perforations, but on the outside, it's made to look like a castle or an old medieval fortress, including arrow slits, which don't really go through, battlements, which are only knee-high, just for show. So this is the end of one of the cell blocks. They're arranged in sort of a wagon wheel design radiating out from a center. This cell block was opened in the 1820s. The prison was actually part of a program started shortly after the American Revolution by a group that actually met in Benjamin Franklin's home. They were horrified by the way prisons were handled in the past, as depicted in this image by William Hogarth, The Rake's Progress, the prison scene, which were pretty nasty places. And this group believed that man would naturally rediscover his penitent nature, which is, of course, where penitentiary comes from. And he would rediscover that if he had time for solitary reflection. So they believe solitary confinement wasn't a punishment, but is actually a therapy. So all of these cells here are solitary confinement type cells. This was a typical cell. Originally, the only access to the solitary confinement cell was through the small door there, which went to the outdoors. And each prisoner had a bed, a small workbench or table, a heater, and a cast iron toilet that was flushed with water once a day. The ceiling was arched, and there used to be a window to admit light from the outside. This corridor here would have been used to pass food and so on into the cells through small holes in the walls. These sliding doors here were added later. They weren't part of the original design. As I mentioned before, the only access for a person would have been through the smaller door on the opposite side of the cells. This prison was designed from the outset by a man from England, an architect called Haviland, and his idea all along was that everything a prisoner would need would be provided by the facility. You know, his air, his light, his water, his natural needs. And so this building was designed from the outset with, you know, primitive running water supply, and at a time when the White House didn't have that kind of thing. So each prisoner's cell would have had this little area, an exercise area that was blocked off from the other prisoners, but did have daylight, and there was a small hole here to admit light and air. And then finally the outer door, and this shows the small access hole into the central corridor. This section of the corridor is restored to appear as it did in 1830. So you can see the small hatches instead of the doorways. In this one instance, a larger hole has been made to show a restored cell. There was actually an inmate called John Curran who was put in here for a couple of years. Prisoners weren't just left to sit, they were given tasks. They had a little work area, and they'd be given jobs such as making shoes, which they'd be trained to do, or dyeing fabric, or making chairs or simple furniture, tasks such as that. Typically they were taken out to get a bath once every couple of weeks. They only had 2 half-hour breaks every day to go out through that door into their private exercise yard. Prisoners were hooded so they couldn't see their surroundings as they came into the prison and into the cell block. They would not see anybody else, and the only visitors they would have would be perhaps a chaplain that they would see in the flesh. The only book they were allowed to have was a Bible, whether they could read it or not. And if they ever left their solitary room or exercise area, then they were hooded again, so they would never see any other prisoners. They would never see the lay of the place. The arched ceiling was deliberate to make it seem chapel-like.
Hey, I'm not sure what's going on with 15. They're going to be off for a moment, so.
As the prison expanded, more cell blocks were added. They radiated out from a central room, which is where we are now. 4 of the 7 cell blocks are 2-story structures.
Yeah, it's up to you. Okay. I like that.
Wow.
Can we do that?
Yeah, I'm fine, yeah.
For a time, this prison was one of the most famous sites in the area. Indeed, when Charles Dickens came over, there were 2 items at the top of his list of must-sees. One of them was Niagara Falls, and the other one was the Eastern State Penitentiary. But what he saw here turned him against the idea. He thought that deliberate meddling with people's minds through the solitary confinement was counterproductive. The audio tour mentions that Al Capone was incarcerated here and actually had his tonsils removed in the prison dispensary or hospital. while many other prisons were built that followed the model of solitary confinement established here, other prisons, such as the notable Sing Sing prison, were designed to have the men interact with each other.
me. Wow, I don't know where they went. Oh,
These are solitary confinement. That was solitary confinement, but that's the blue one. That's the blue outside.
I was taking my time back in the cell block here because along with the photos along the walls, they have the audio tour kind of keeping sync with the pictures and all the quoted inmates and guards describing what things were like over the years. It went from a prison that was intent on solitary confinement, and then they started doing 2, and I believe even one of the cell blocks is actually 3 stories tall, and they got rid of the idea of having private exercise areas, more mingling of the inmates, and eventually they just went to a model that this became, instead of a general penitentiary, it became a high security or maximum security penitentiary. And at that point they reverted to the model that is more stereotypical of prisons in probably in most people's minds. They'd have the, you know, the big exercise yard like we might see here, and the prisoners were playing, you know, games and working together and recreating and so on.
Yeah, we need to go
7. Oh, take it. Yeah, you should be.
So that's a guard tower on top of the central rotunda. This is another cell block here with this odd building in the middle of it. So you basically have that round or rotunda in the middle, 7 cell blocks radiating out, each one of a somewhat different design, and then the whole thing surrounded by the large brick wall going all the way around, or stone wall actually. This cell block, which I believe is cell block 4, has what would have been the lower level private or solitary exercise yards, a couple of them restored more or less as they would have been, and then the rest are closed in with modern skylights and used as some sort of offices. this solitary exercise yard is more or less the way it would have been back in the 1820s or 30s. Got your little door into the solitary cell. The prisoner would be able to get some sunlight and get some fresh air, but they would not see another prisoner or probably even hear them. With the prison built in the early 1800s, the corners of the outer wall had these guard towers. This guard tower is the way it would have been in about 1820. By contrast, as they had more prisoners come in here, more crowding and a more social environment, they needed something that could see in between the cell blocks. So this guard tower, which is added over the rotunda, dates from the 1950s, more than 100 years after this guard tower right behind it. And of course, downtown Philadelphia is right there. The prison was deemed outmoded and unsafe, and by 1960 they were shutting it down, more or less one cell block at a time, and they were thinking of actually renovating parts of it to use as sort of a shopping mall. They were thinking of renovating it to use as condominiums. They were thinking of razing it to the ground and building something else here, and finally they decided to turn it into the museum that it is today, keeping most of it as a ruin and restoring it just enough to arrest continued ruination, and then restoring just enough to show people what it would have been like at various points in its use. And this, by the way, was supposed to be a baseball diamond here. Eastern State Penitentiary was closed in 1970. Along this wall are remnants of old wooden benches on steel tube frames. It's not mentioned specifically, but because this was a baseball diamond here, that they may have been the equivalent of the grandstands for other inmates to watch the games. Some of them have been painted and made useful, the others remain as ruins. This is one of the corner guard towers. This short wing here, after the incinerator, was part of the tuberculosis yard. These subterranean passages went under at least some of the cell blocks, handling the sewage lines from the toilets in each of the prisoners' cells, and presumably the water feed as well. Very low ceiling. This is one of the newer cell blocks, cell block number 14, completed in 1927. Built entirely with inmate labor. It had to fit between existing buildings, making it impossible to see from one end of cell block 14 corridor to the other. Remnants of the old toilet there. So you can see that the structure is a 3-story structure. There's the upper story, middle story, and the lowest story. And it kind of goes down and then jogs to the left. Some of the cells in this cell block have been opened up to artists to put various objects to art in there. The uneven nature of this cell block, you can see by the sloping walls coming in that they're getting narrower. This is clearly used as a storeroom, not a cell.
Were you guys here for the music on?
Here's a board on some films that used the penitentiary. Brad Pitt and Bruce Willis standing on this very spot during a scene from the film The 12 Monkeys. Shia LaBeouf used cell block 7 for Transformers 2, The Revenge of the Fallen. Sting posed here for the cover of his 2001 album, All This Time. Tina Turner. Vince Vaughn and Anne Heck in Return to Paradise, which stands in for a Malaysian prison.
Everyone knows that you can't ever just beat me one key and you got to take something. I had to get out. I love the car. I wasn't even paying, you know. I couldn't even get it out. So me and my girl Crystal, right? We're gonna get out, you know? So my cousin's gonna give me a car. We're gonna take off to a bigger town, so give me a car, so get out.
Looks like this may have been adapted as a shower room or a hosing off room or delousing room or something, but it's not indicated by signage. On the inner walls of the penitentiary, at the corners below the guard towers, the walls are deliberately arched instead of just made square, because it would make it harder for an inmate to wedge themselves into the corner, grabbing the edges of the bricks or stones and work their way up. Well, it took me just under 2 hours to see pretty much everything at the Eastern State Penitentiary. I wasn't really sure what to expect when I came here, but I was very glad that I did. This is a great destination for visitors to the Philadelphia area. Very interesting place, and even if you're not interested in the history, any photo buff would just have a field day with some of the opportunities for composition here.